Hello, I'm Ted Gioia, and I'm doing a series of unscripted video talks about matters related to music and culture. Today I'd like to ask, is the 3-minute pop song bad for music? If you go back to the earliest histories of music, you realize that music wasn't always about entertainment. It wasn't always about diversion, but often it was embedded in ritual, and the purpose of these rituals was often to get into an altered mind state, a kind of trance. Our knowledge of this was expanded enormously starting in the early 1960s. A researcher named Andrew Nair discovered that if you listen to music long enough, your brain waves begin to match the rhythms of the music. Now, this was exciting, but in fact, Nair was simply making specific and scientific speculation that had existed for a long time. If you go back into ancient times, Ptolemy recognized that a visual rhythm could create an altered mind state. And for Ptolemy, he used a rotating wheel with spokes, and behind it there was a source of light. And he found that when people stared into the rotating wheel, which created a flicker in the light at a regular rhythm, they eventually experienced a state of euphoria. So the ancients knew about this long before neuroscience confirmed it. In fact, this has even been seen in the animal kingdom. People have noticed chimpanzees traveling many miles to get to a waterfall where they simply sit and look at the reflected rhythms of the light moving on the water. So this is embedded in our brains, the seeking for trance and altered mind states out of musical rhythms. But here's the catch. You can't do that in just 3 minutes. I've studied the use of music in ritual all around the world. The shamans of Siberia, or Native American music, or what you see off in Australia. And in almost every instance, the musical ritual involving rhythm has to last at least around 10 minutes before we get the trance benefit from it. The same is true of body physiology. Dr. Barry Bittman did a study a few years ago of people who play drums in a drum circle. And he found that playing drums actually makes you healthier. It changes your blood cell count. It releases antibodies into your bloodstream. But once again, Barry Bittman discovered you needed to play drums for 10 minutes in order to get the physiological benefits out of the rhythm. So this is the conflict we've had for centuries between using music as a source of trance and music as a source of entertainment. And even governments get into the mix to regulate this. There's a famous instance in the year 186 AD when the Roman Senate made the Bacchanalia illegal. Now, the Bacchanalia was a ritual in which people would use music and rhythm to get to altered states. And often they did crazy things in those altered states, or even violent things. So the government felt they had to regulate it. So there are good reasons for controlling the length of a musical performance. But it's worth noting that the reason we have a 3-minute pop song has nothing to do with government regulation. It has nothing to do with physiology. It comes from the early history of recordings in which the records could only contain around 3 minutes of music. At that point, you lost storage, or disk space as we would call it nowadays. So we have lived now for the last century with a musical culture that emphasizes 3-minute performances. But the sad thing about this is that it negates the opportunity to create altered mind states and a sense of ecstasy and euphoria out of the music. I think this is why we see some very creative musicians fight against the constraints of the 3-minute song. If you study, for example, the history of John Coltrane, you see as he progressed in his career, he wanted his songs to be longer and longer. And I don't think it's a coincidence that almost all of them at a certain point went beyond 10 minutes. There was also this great moment with the flowering of rock in the late 1960s where rock bands we're pushing for longer and longer performances. I've read an interview with George Harrison talking about the song Hey Jude, the longest Beatles song ever released on record. And he said this became a hit single because it had a hypnotic effect. We are now long after the age when we have to worry about limited disk storage. We no longer need to worry about keeping our songs to 3 minutes length. Is it time for us to explore the advantages of longer song forms? Not just to get better songs, but to tap into the ability of music to lock into our brain and change our perceptions of reality. I would suggest we need to do that because music needs to be about more than just entertainment. And we should use our songs to reach that higher level rather than constrain our lives and our perceptions.